Well, several years ago, I know that the church was introducing a ministry program. And I always thought, it would be cool to learn how to pray for people. Not that I ever actually wanted to do that, and I never thought I could. But I thought it would be neat just to learn how to pray. So I went to the training, and in the process, I started to hear a lot of things that was new to me. And they started to talk about the power of your words, making word vows. They talked about, in the commandments, they talk about honoring your father and your mother. And that's the only commandment that comes with a promise, that longer days would be added to your life. And I was remembering in that moment that I actually made a vow when I was younger, several years earlier, about eight years before that I would never be like my dad. And you see, when I was a teenager, we had actually, we went through some rough stuff. He'd been laid off and he went bankrupt. We lost our house. And at that moment, I said, I don't ever want to go through this situation. I'm going to go make my first million by the time I'm 30. And it started this path of me just really focusing on making money. And the more things I had, the more value I had, and I had a very skewed perception of reality. But in this training, I realized that I had said that, and I needed to go ask for forgiveness, because in the training they talked about so many of our physical ailments can actually come from spiritual matters. And I went to my dad the next day, and I remember walking in and just, crying out, "Dad, I'm sorry. I judged you, and I didn't realize, and I just begged his forgiveness." And in the moment, there was an emotional healing. And I found out he had actually blamed me for some things that I didn't even realize I had been doing. And so there was very much an emotional healing that day. And I remember going to church that night. I walked in with expectation. I remember opening the door saying, "This is my night. I'm going to get healed." Because I had had this terrible pain in my neck for 8 years. And, I was spending a lot of money getting massages and just trying to get the pain to go away. I don't know if anyone else has ever experienced that, where you feel like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. And that's where I was at. So I walked in knowing that my neck was going to be healed. And it was actually, you could see it. It was a muscle spasm that had developed. And it was like, you could see it was almost like a rock on my shoulder. And I walked in, I was like, this is my night. So I go forward and I go to get prayer from an incredible couple. I mean, they were just amazing. And they start to pray for me. And as they're praying, the pain actually got worse. and they're like, "So how do you feel?" I'm like, "Not so great. Like, this, you guys are really bad at this. Like, what's going on? This should be going away." And they said, "You know what? We're going to pray again. We're not giving up. We're going after it." And so, they continued to pray. And as they did, the pastor, I could hear him in the background say that he felt like God was healing somebody of a thyroid issue. And I don't really remember what happened after that. I just remember I fell. Like, it was like I got hit with the power of God, and I stood up. I didn't even think about getting prayer for my thyroid. It was just something I learned to live with. I'd been taking medicine for it for about 8 or 9 years. I just learned to live with it. So when I stood up, I was like, wow, I think I just got healed. Like, I couldn't lift my arm really above. Like how a child would go and reach for mom and dad? I couldn't pick my arm up. And when I stood up, they said, "How do you feel?" I'm like, "I feel really good." And so we tested it. And sometimes it's that step of faith, and and all of a sudden I realized I'm able to reach my arm, and this pain was gone, and that muscle spasm in my neck was gone. Like, you could see a physical difference. And I knew that I had been healed of my thyroid issue. And testing later, I would go to the doctors and they would say, "Yeah, you've been healed, stop taking the medicine." But the coolest part was the next day I go to work and I turn on my computer and I'm like, wow, this computer it's kind of blurry. And I take my glasses off and I didn't even realize that he healed my vision. And I was like, God, this is awesome. What? And I just remember God just told me that day, "I will give you more than you ask." And I was so in awe of God's love in that moment, because I had gone in with an expectation of healing for physical pain, but he healed me beyond that. Things that I wasn't even thinking about, things that I had learned to live with. And that's what, and I realized God is no respecter of persons. Like, what he'll do for me, he'll do for others. And he wants to give you more than you even ask, more than you know to ask for. And so that started a journey. You know, I didn't realize, you know, in the judgment of my dad, you know, I said I would never go bankrupt, I would never lose my houses. Well, I had actually gone through this process of going bankrupt. I didn't just lose one house, I lost two. I had built it all on my own strength, and then it crumbled. And then I, you know, went through this process of learning and learning how to walk with a forgiving heart, how to accept forgiveness for things that I've done that I didn't even realize sometimes that I had done. And it started a journey of me learning to just trust God and walk in faith. But then over time, you get comfortable, and I started to rebuild, and I started to do it in my own strength again. And then a few years ago, as we're getting to that point that I'm starting to get a little prideful again about look at what we've been able to create, I get a phone call that my house had just burned down. And I remember driving home that day, and I'm arguing with God, and I'm like, God, I was praying for a new kitchen. I didn't want a whole new house, just a new kitchen, you know, but the power of your words. And I had been praying, you know, after everything we've been through, I was crying out, God, I want to have the heart of Enoch. I want to have an understanding of Job's heart. And you have to be careful sometimes how you pray, you know, because he'll give you what you ask for, but you don't always understand sometimes what you're asking for in those moments. And I had come to have such a dependency and to build my own worth on things. I put my value in things. And when the fire happened, it destroyed everything with the exception of my car. The next day, I'm driving to meet a friend, and my car breaks down on the highway, and it's gone. So in the period of 24 hours, we literally lost every material possession we'd had. And in the moment, all I could do was be thankful that my family was alive. My husband even ran back into the house to save our dogs. Like, everything that mattered was intact. And I was able to let go of all the stuff that I'd put so much value on. I heard that there's a story of a guy who's walking through a village, and he sees a master potter who's building this pot. And he takes it and he throws it in the fire. And then he pulls it out and he hits it. And then he throws it back in the fire. And then he pulls it out and he hits it again. And then he throws it back in the fire. And the guy comes up and asks him, you know, how do you know when it's done? And the guy says, if I hit it and it sings, then it's done. I was like, wow. So I feel like that, and even as I started to study, you know, like the power of fire and what it can do in a purification process. If you put precious metal into the fire and then you pull it out, all of the dross comes to the top and you can scrape it, and then you put it back in the fire. And then you bring it back out and you scrape the junk and the impurities. And every time it goes back in the fire, what it's doing is it's creating this purification process so that what you're getting is the most purified, precious metal. And I feel like that's what God can do, is sometimes we go through things we don't always understand. Sometimes it's painful. Fire's hot, it can burn. But what can happen in the process is God can bring you into a place of recognition and understanding true value, what he sees value in, which is people. And he can lead you down a path that can put you in a position to really pursue purpose. You know, and that's my challenge now as we work with kids and teenagers and young adults. Like, what's your purpose? What are you created, and what are you designed to do? And I think that's so powerful, because sometimes there's pain in the process, but what you get at the end of it is pretty incredible.